Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I declare the Audit and Risk Committee meeting AR 21-4 open and welcome everyone present. As an external attendees, we've got Clarence Susan, our auditor, and Mark Maloney, our independent member, joining us on Zoom from Auckland. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Tashina Abraham over there. She started with us right before lockdown, and so we welcome her. I'll let Kumaran introduce her more fully later on. So I call for a move and a seconder to accept apologies from Councillor Gray, Councillor Henry, and Councillor Marsh. So moved Councillor Thwaites and Councillor Sull. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. I'm not aware of any late items. Declarations of interest. Anyone have a declaration of interest, please? No, thank you. There are no public excluded items. I'm not aware of anyone for a public forum. No, okay. So we'll move on to the first item, which is a summary of audit and risk agenda topics. With Kumaran, and Clarence will take us through his audit letter as well, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. This report essentially just sets out what's in the rest of the agenda, but with two focus points in particular. The first one is on point 3 under the background, which talks about the committee work plan. So attachment 1 is essentially what is drafted as a work plan for the next 12 months for the committee. And the second item of focus is the interim audit management report, which Clarence Susan is in attendance to present the report and have provide the opportunity for the committee members to ask any questions on the report itself. But yeah, other than that, I'll take the report as read, and if there's any questions on the work plan, happy to address those.
Anyone wants to speak to the work plan? Councillor Maloney, are you wishing to speak? Sorry, independent member Maloney.
Thank you, Chairman, and through the Chair. I've just got a couple of questions on the work plan, Kumaran. In terms of the Audit New Zealand management letter, when in the work plan will the final management letter be received? And secondly, with regards to the 2022-23 audit arrangements letter, why, I guess the question is, why does the arrangements letter not come to this committee until June of next year, which is actually right at the end of the financial year? Is there an opportunity to bring that forward to March?
Through the Chair, I can answer those questions. The audit engagement letter, that's something we can work with Clarence or Audit New Zealand on for the next audit to try and ensure that's brought to the committee in the March meeting as opposed to the June meeting. But I'll defer to Clarence to make comment on that when he presents on the interim management report on the practicalities around that, because ultimately that's a document generated by Audit New Zealand for council to sign off on and for the committee to consider. In regards to your second question around the final audit management report, that was made available to council subsequent to the agenda closing for this meeting. So management still have to consider providing management comments to the report, and that will be distributed for council consideration as part of the next, at the first committee meeting next year.
Thanks, you, Kumaran. Next question, in terms of the reporting on legal risk, I appreciate this committee gets regular reports on litigation risks, but what reporting does the committee receive on compliance with legislation, regulations and government policies, which is actually part of the committee's mandate and its delegations?
So there has been no formal report to the committee on that particular control in the past. The control measures in place for that is obviously what is part of audit focus through external audits in terms of legislative compliance and how we respond to those requirements as part of the audit process and report against that. That's through the LTP and the annual reporting process. So what could be an opportunity for the committee to consider is for that to be factored into the assurance program when that's brought to the committee at the next committee meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Kumar. I mean, I'd suggest it would be addressed through the risk reset process, the refresh of risk management policies next year, addressed through that mechanism.
Happy to consider that as part of that piece of work.
Thank you. And the final question on the work program was, I note later in the report in the top risk update, there's reference to the fraud gap assessment being completed in the next calendar year, I think it is. I get questioned in terms of this work program, what role does this committee have in terms of reviewing the results of that fraud gap assessment?
So we will consider factoring that also into the assurance work program and bringing that to the committee prior to any fraud questionnaires being completed by the mayor and members of senior management, so that the committee can have oversight of that before we provide those responses to audit as part of the next audit process.
Thank you, Kumaran.
Councillor Murray-Benj.
Question, Kumaran. Could you just explain to me, please, 3.1, payroll master file changes. What's the weakness that we've had and what are the benefits of the change?
Sorry, Councillor Murray-Benj, which page are you on exactly?
I'm on page 10.
Do we want to answer that question after Clarence Susan has taken us through his letter? Perhaps that would be. Perhaps we should answer that question once Clarence Susan has gone through his letter, because we're on the work plan at the moment, not the audit letter. So, were there any other questions on the audit work plan? Okay.
Just for clarity for the members of the committee, there's two separate attachments. The work plan is the work plan for the committee for the year ahead. The audit management report is audits, sets out audits findings on the interim visit. They paid council for the last annual report that was just adopted.
So perhaps now, I'll ask Clarence Susan to present his interim audit letter, and then we'll take questions on that after he's done that. So Clarence, are you there and can talk to your letter, please?
Yes, I'm here, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and all councillors and Mark. So yes, this is the letter that we've issued after our interim audit, which was quite late this year, and I'll get back to Mark's question around the timing of the audit letters as well. The findings that we have is in our interim audit is on the control environment, and then also the findings, as councillor just asked, on the payroll master file changes is one of our, was the first finding that we had, is a control breakdown in the internal controls. So I can speak to that. I'll just at a high level talk about what we found. So it's the payroll master file changes report, just a review of that, asset disposal forms, and timeliness of capitalization of work in progress. And there's some SSPs, or the non-financial reporting on crash reporting, that was resolved with a final audit. To come back, and then we just talked about some of the things like our fraud considerations and the audit timing. As you're all aware, we're under a lot of pressure with finding auditors to get through our work program, and that will lead into my answer to member Mark Maloney as well, just to answer that question about the timeliness of our engagement letters. So for the question about the payroll master file changes report, what we found there is that the person with access to make changes reviews the report, and there's a risk of segregation of duties. Now, whenever we find a weakness, we have to report that. It is then for management and then this committee ultimately to decide if the risk is of such a nature that can be accepted, or do we need to find an alternative way to mitigate the risk? And that's what that specific point is about. Just to answer the question of Mark, so the final management report has been issued. It is with management, and I think we've received the comments. It was just a bit too late to make the cutoff for this committee meeting. We finished the audit pretty much a week or two ago, so it was quite pressure to get that done. That will be discussed at the next audit and risk meeting, and I think that's scheduled for early next year. At that stage, I will also bring the next appointed auditor along to introduce him. I have to rotate off, as I explained, after my 6 years, and then I will do the final management report, introduce the new audit director, appointed auditor, and at that stage, we will discuss the timing of the 2022 audit and also the engagement letter, audit fee letter, and the audit plan. Now, the audit plan is scheduled to come into the committee in about June. The reason for that is quite late in a normal year. We are still in the process of finalizing some of our 21 June year-end audits, including councils. So it means that there's a lot of CCOs that will be pushed out into the next year, which means that our planning and our interim audits will be done very late next year. So it will be May, June, July onwards, where normally we will start our planning in December or January for the next year. So there's about a 6-month delay in our normal timing. But if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Councillor Murray Bench, has your question been answered satisfactorily? Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question, Clarence, and that is it's for Kumaran, really. In the Audit New Zealand letter, are there any recommendations that you feel might be difficult to comply with, and if so, why?
No, none of the risk management responses in relation to the findings and recommendations from Audit New Zealand are considered insurmountable, and that'll be part of our improvement program for the year ahead.
Thank you. Mayor Webber.
Thank you. And following on from that, your question, given the auditors are not, there is a lag in there, what is stopping us from best practice and saying we'll fix this ourselves? And are you confident that you're ahead of the game so that, if there's anything in there that is, got a bit of a sniff test, it's got a question mark over it, we can actually get on with it rather than wait for the auditors, because we could be waiting for quite a while.
So the assurance program that we'll be looking to develop together with senior management to bring back to the committee at for the first meeting next year is part of that proactive measure in terms of identifying areas of risk that we feel needs priority and what opportunities for improvement there are based on the findings of the work we carry through that, and responding to those findings independent of the audit process, but also keeping external auditors in the loop on how we are progressing on that basis to enhance the management control environment assessment that they do as part of the audit.
Supplementary. Given the three waters is going to take a hell of a lot of executive time, and it's mainly your team's executive time, are you confident you've got the resource to run the business as usual, but also do all the other work that's required through the three waters, leading up to a transition through the next couple of years?
So as signaled through an earlier annual planned workshop, that is certainly the resource requirements for Three Waters against delivering business as usual is certainly on the mind of senior management and the project team for Three Waters. And the next area of focus is looking at further delving into what those resource requirements are and how we look to supplement that to balance the demands of both workloads.
And the final one on the same vein, given that 98% of New Zealand councils are going to be looking for this resource, I suspect we need to get out of the blocks very quickly, because if you want, we're going to need some of the best staff we can get, because we're one of the councils that have done their job properly, and we want to make sure we get full value. So we need to make sure the caliber of those people, it's not only the numbers, but it's the quality of them, that we make sure we've got really good staff in this area, making sure that any transition we're not damaged by on the way through.
I agree, and I'd probably go just to be a little bit blunter than Kamaran. I'd say we definitely haven't got the resource that we need to be able to manage business and to manage the project. So the only way we are going to be able to achieve this is to bring people in to backfill where we've got the expertise, or bring in expertise that we don't have. And I think particularly around program management or project management of the change as a whole across the organisation. I think we've got not just Kamaran's area, but also we're going to need resource in HR and other parts of the business as well to get us through that process. I agree. Probably the most important part of that is getting a program or project manager on to help us with that sooner rather than later.
Councillor Granger.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Clarence, I've just got a question on 3.3, where it appears that you found a problem that wasn't there. Am I misunderstanding that? Because you said we recommend that the information be reviewed, and then the management comment is that the information's all there in a database for anybody to see.
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, so with the interim audit, we had the discussions with the team that there's certain data that needed to be included. It wasn't sure if it was included. When we concluded in the final audit, it's been confirmed that it's always been included in the reported result. It was more a heads up saying, please make sure that these changes, if there's any changes needed, are incorporated for the final audit. Hope that makes sense what I'm saying.
Member Maloney, I believe you've got your hand up virtually.
Thank you, through the chair. Look, I've got some questions on the payroll master file issue, Clarence, that you raised, and the questions part for Clarence and part for Kumaran. The payroll master file control, the review of the payroll master file is a fairly important control when it comes to mitigating the risk of fraud or error. So a question first of all for you, for Clarence. How long has this weakness actually existed? Is this a new issue that just simply arose this year because of a change in the design of the control, or is this something that's always been there? And the second part of the question is, what additional work did you have to do to actually obtain the required assurance that we don't have an issue with regards to the fraud or error?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so this is a change in the current year that I think it was because of staff changes and at council. What we've done to get assurance was to do substantive testing around the master file changes, making sure that the person with the access to make changes didn't make any of those changes. So we did some substantive testing ourselves to ensure that none of that controls or none of that changes have been made to that can lead to fraud.
Okay, look, thank you, Clarence. And the answer, the first part of that answer is actually means I don't have to ask a question of Kumaran. I was a little bit concerned we'd had this for a long time, but you're giving me the assurance that no, we don't. This is a new issue. So thank you, Clarence.
Councillor Dean.
Could I ask, I think it might be Kamaran, does the changes to the payroll file mean that every time anybody makes a claim for travel, it has to be changed, or is that is travel allowances a separate thing?
Travel allowance is a separate process. This is more just changes to the master file control for payroll. That's the point in question. So the question you've raised is a separate process to that.
Member Maloney, did you have any further questions, or you signed out there? Member Maloney, did you have any further questions?
No further questions from you on the management report, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Daly.
Yeah, sorry, James. Just in regard to that 3.1, it does seem like a long period to address the problem with 2021-22 financial year. is it not possible to define a shorter period to address what seems to be quite a substantive problem?
So through the chair, that's this financial year that we're looking to address that.
So you're happy that you can resolve it fairly quickly?
We've actually got compensating controls already in place for that, manual controls.
Okay, if there's no further questions, 2 recommendations there, so I'll call for a mover and a seconder. Moved Councillor Granger, seconded Councillor Sol. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, say aye. Against, carried. We now move to page 15, the risk and assurance update. And Tashina, you are up, so welcome and good luck.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just before Tashina commences, I thought I'd just advise the committee members. Tashina's our newly appointed Senior Risk and Assurance Specialist. So Tashina's primary responsibilities would be looking after providing service and advice to the business around the risk framework, risk recording, and reporting back to the committee, and also any assurance work that's been highlighted and endorsed by the committee for the year ahead to carry out specific assignments and report back to the committee. So Tashina's had extensive experience abroad and in central government around internal audits and risk assurance, and brings a wealth of experience which will hopefully be of benefit to the committee as we carry out the programme for the rest of the year.
So we'll take it as the report is read, but Tashina, did you want to add anything to that report?
No, it's actually been very interesting to work in the council, and I've been engaging with all the group managers and the other managers, and we've been coming along a certain journey even for the BCP. So I'm sure when we start the risk recut of the registers, it will be very the journey will have to work both ways, because I will need their input and be able to evaluate along with them. So it's going to be an interesting experience.
Thank you. If there's no questions on that, I'll call for mover and seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Scrimger and Councillor Murray Benj. Oh, before we do that, Mark Maloney, you had a question.
Oh, thank you. Just a quick question on the business continuity plans. Tashina, what work is being done to actually test the plans to ensure they work as planned?
Yes, we are planning to do the scenario testing in the Jan to March quarter of 2022, and we would select any 2 teams and test their BCP. All the critical functions are going to be documented by November 30th for most teams. So we'll pick any 2 random teams and test their BCP. And see what worked well versus what didn't, and see the lessons learned and apply it next time again.
Thanks, Tashina.
Okay, we had the recommendation moved by Deputy Mayor Scrimger and Councillor Murray Benj, I think it was. Yes, so all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move on to page 16, the Treasury Update Report. David Jensen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and elected members. I'll take this report as read with the exception of the interest rate risk. So a key update this quarter is around the market movements in predominantly in inflation and interest rates. I'm sure you'll have all read through the newspapers that interest rates are increasing, the mortgage rates are increasing, and also that inflation is increasing. So for the period ended at the end of September, the full year-on-year insurance was almost 5%, so a lot higher than we've had in a long time, and that is putting pressure on our council's interest rates moving forward. We are working with Bancorp, our Treasury advisors, to make sure that we are in the best place within our policy, to make sure that we are firstly within policy with our interest rate risk, and secondly that we are positioned to absorb those increases over time. And we are working with budget holders around the business to understand how much money they expect to spend in order to properly model what our borrowing requirements and subsequent interest rates over time as well. But I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Mayor Webber.
Thanks, Chairman. Given what you've just taken us through, do you see any risk we have on our forecast for both our interest rates and our inflation numbers in our current financial year? Or do you think we're pretty well covered there?
I think it depends on the activity. So an activity like roading, we have a lot more insulation because we have price contracts with the likes of Westlink. When we look around other areas of the business like Three Waters or Parks and Rec, we are experiencing pressures when prices come through tenders and procurement, especially in the cost of materials and the cost of professional services to deliver those contracts. And what that means for our debt is that, particularly with the constraints in the market, with the lack of contractors, there is a chance that we will be able to do less. So we won't be able. There is a chance that we may not be able to achieve everything we hope to, but the things that we do will cost us more. So it is a balancing act.
Councillor Dean.
I realise that things are pretty fluid at the moment, but yesterday's announcement of a record unemployment rate of 3.4% must have some effect on interest rates. What do you expect to happen because of this?
Clearly, with an unemployment rate that low, so it's the lowest since before the financial crisis, it's going to have pressures on wages. It's going to have pressures on inflation moving forward. I mean, we're still understanding what that looks like for our business, in which we are factoring that in for the 2022-23 annual plan, making some adjustments that I'm sure you'll see coming through in future workshops. But things are very fluid, and we're working as best we can to make sure we can absorb those pressures.
Member Maloney, I believe you have your hand up.
Thank you, and thank you, David. The question is really around the inflation aspect, David, in terms of you referred to the fact that you're seeing an increase in prices for your procurement processes. At the moment, how are those increases, how do they compare to what you factored into your LTP in terms of inflation assumptions?
When we prepared our budget for this financial year, we were given the choice between three inflation scenarios. We were conservative as a council and chose the scenario with the highest inflation proportion. The prices we're seeing coming through are higher than probably what we expected through that process. I don't think many people could have foreseen what's happening over the last number of months. As I say, it is something like transport, which is our biggest spend, is a lot more insulated than the rest of the business. But we are expecting in some areas prices that are not substantially, but marginally higher than what we had budgeted. But we're only one quarter of the way through the financial year, and we're looking to monitor what happens for the remaining 3 quarters of the year.
Thank you, David.
Councillor Murray-Benj.
David, you won't have a crystal ball for this, but tell me, have you any idea the unemployment level is supposed to come down, but the numbers are being transferred over to job search or something, and so it's really a conflicting environment that you're having to work in. Is the amount of debt that the country is accumulating, is that having an impact on what you're doing, or is that something we're going to hit later down the road?
In terms of the first point with unemployment, you're right. There are some unusual things happening with statistics where unemployment is trending down. You'd expect to see the job seeker numbers decreasing as well, but you're actually seeing divergent. There's a lot of unexplained things in the numbers where unemployment is decreasing, but the number of people applying for benefits is sharply increasing. There's a lot of things that Stats NZ are trying to understand themselves. In terms of government debt, it doesn't necessarily have a great deal of bearing on what we do as a council now, but it will mean as a country, we've probably got some tough questions in the next couple of years.
No further questions from anyone? Mark?
No, none from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as the Treasury update report, I call for a mover and seconder for the recommendation. Mayor Webber, Councillor Dean, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move on to the quarterly review of risk profile, which is on page 18. And again, we have Tashina.
Thank you. Do you all, I understand you all have read the report. Do you all have any questions on it?
Councillor Granger.
Yeah, my understanding that this was mostly written before the government mandated announcement came out. So obviously there's some massive changes. Are you going to update us on that review?
Yes, so it came out very recently. So that the main risk would be all the transition risk involved with the assets, the people. So we'll have to review the whole thing and see what controls we can put in place. So even the transition happens very smoothly. But I'll need to review the entire process.
Well, the risks go a long way further than just that.
Pardon me?
I said the risks go a long way further than just that.
Yes, but I'll have to do a deep dive into that specific risk to be able to give you a big explanation on it.
I'd like to highlight a couple of emerging risks, which I think perhaps need to be considered or highlighted. First one, which we've discussed a little bit today, is the issue of if the RMA amendment goes through and three-storey homes will be allowed, three-storey homes will be allowed, and what happens to our ability to collect FINCOs. I know Rachel has partly assuaged us with that, but it's far from clear the full ramifications. So that's one thing I'd like to consider. And secondly, an increased around community engagement, which is risk number 8. We've had cancelled community board meetings and ward forums. We have a shift to Zoom, which doesn't suit everyone. There's other cancelled engagement opportunities, such as with the Athenry crossing and engagements like that. And also we've had the perceived lack of consultation on Three Waters, which is obviously a fairly hot topic. And taken together, I feel that there's a risk out there reputationally for us and in terms of how we communicate with our ratepayers. So I don't know if you'd like to comment.
Yes, so what I'll be doing this next quarter, in the coming quarter, is basically working with the senior leadership team and renewing the risk management policy and the framework. As soon as that's done, I can look into each and every risk and then be able to sit with the group managers or their managers and see what controls we can put in place, because they know their risk and they are the risk owners. So they would also know their controls, because it's all good having the controls here, but we need to test and monitor them to see if they're actually working. So, but I will have to deep dive into each one of these, segregate them, rate them, give the correct risk rating, and then be able to, work out, okay, can we have a better control? Is this control working? And yeah, so it will take a little time, but we will definitely get there as a group. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Fraser.
You just posed a question about those three-storey buildings. We have the ability to put financial contributions on a retirement village, even though they don't do any subdivision of a block. They build multiple houses. So it's probably timely because they actually get quite a discount. So is that same discount going to apply to other homeowners? So is there a policy review needed there, or if this is going to become more common spread?
So you refer to the potential to rate on the basis of,
It's not rate, and financial contributions. They pay whatever, 80% of what someone else building a single dwelling would do for a retirement village. So someone's building 3 houses on one section, do they get 80% for the other 2, or what goes on? Oh, Rachel's over there.
Rachel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a really good analogy or comparison that you've given, Councillor Waite. I think the difference between the retirement village scenario and the scenario that Mr. Chair is explaining is that a retirement village requires a land use consent. So we attach the condition requiring the payment of financial contributions to the land use consent. The scenario that the chairman is explaining relates to permitted activities. So the question is, will there be provision in this new legislation to collect financial contributions, notwithstanding that the particular developer doesn't need to come to council for a resource consent? They will still need a building consent, of course. So that's the risk that's been highlighted, and I think that will become clearer as the housing supply bill process progresses.
Mayor Webber?
Yeah, I hear what you're looking to do, but I just wonder, it's very early in the new year, whether it's time for us to step back and say, actually, have we got the right risk register in place? Because the world is changing so quickly. And Don makes the point, if you look at what we learned through the global financial crisis, great after the event, we were quite bright people, but before the event, we weren't. And when you look at what we are going to go through in the changing of the landscape, I just wonder whether we need to go right back to square one and say, have we got it right? Because, you're talking about community engagement. We put a lot of effort into community engagement, but there are larger councils than ours that don't have any community boards, don't have any board. They just go straight one to the, have we got our structure right, given what's coming up the lift? And I think we need to have a look. We discussed it this morning, the future of local government. What does that mean? And I think we better to front foot this than learn or do what we did through the global financial crisis, is afterwards say, oh, this is a big hole we're in. We could alleviate the pain a little bit by learning from it and getting front footing this early in the new year. And I think we really want to have a long, hard look at where we're going.
Councillor Granger?
Yeah, I was thinking some of the thoughts and wondering whether, in line with what you're doing and having another look at this, whether it's time to schedule in a workshop to really get into these and have a look. I mean, I'm sort of surprised that we're worrying it. We've got a risk listed in here that's changing at 2 millimetres a year. I mean, there are much bigger things to worry about than something that's changing for 2 millimetres a year, and yet they aren't in here yet. So there's a time for a real rehash of this, I think.
Come on, can you speak to that on when we do a deep dive coming up, don't we? Or
in relation to Mayor Webber's comment about revisiting the risk profile and doing an assessment of what the current risks are. So we have a plan in place to work with the senior leadership team ahead of the next Audit and Risk Committee to look at those risks and present to you a starting point for discussion for the committee at the next committee meeting. And we'll look at any potential options there to have a workshop in terms of any of those risks that would then complement the agenda for the committee meeting.
Councillor Marybenge?
I support what the Mayor is saying. I'd like to think that we would front foot the issues of local government reform. My experience is that good councils the size of this one just get buried, and that doesn't matter how incompetent the bigger one is, they tend to, forgive me Auckland, but it doesn't matter how big they are, they tend to dominate any reform process, and all the good features that exist from a smaller local authority just get lost. So front footing, I think, is really quite important.
Member Maloney, did you have your hand up?
Yes, look, it's just very similar comments that have been expressed by the Mayor and others. It's I do see the risk refresh process early next year as being a reset of the top risks for the reasons that have been articulated. There's a hell of a lot of change going on and it's very fluid. The couple of additional observations I had were in the people space, right at the moment with COVID, which is very, fast moving. The way that council responds to, the vaccination issue, what that means for staff, contractors, volunteers, visitors, etc., and also the people risk in terms of the opening up of the borders and what that means for the workforce and the risks around that. So there's an awful lot of things that are very fluid at the moment, and I think it's very timely to spend some really focused time resetting the top risks early next year and whether they're still fit for purpose.
Thank you, Member Maloney. Were there any further questions on this topic? Councillor Daly.
Well, I was just really wanting to question John Holyoake about the decision to can the ward forum when the community boards seem to have come up with a solution, as you told us earlier, why the ward forum couldn't have operated on the same principle.
Well, I think we discussed that in executive forum, so I think that's probably been covered, Councillor Daly. I'm also, before I ask for a mover, I'm conscious that Mr. Susan's with us and listening intently. It's entirely up to you whether you stay with us, Mr. Susan, or you're welcome to move to your next meeting or whatever. So I just wanted to give you that option.
Thank you. I'll take that option, and thanks again for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the letter. Thank you. Okay, so there's 5 recommendations there. I'll call for a mover on those, please. Councillor Granger, Councillor Murray-Benge, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. We now have item 9.5, update on outstanding audit items on page 39. So if we can move there, and Tashina, this is your one. Or Kumar, would you like to cover that, you said?
So this particular report is just, again, a standing agenda item that's setting out all of the outstanding management report items from past external audits and internal audits. So essentially external audits carried out by Audit New Zealand and previous internal audits carried out by KPMG. Essentially, there's been a slightly different approach to what's disclosed on the outstanding items tables. All items that have previously been recorded as closed have now been moved into an info pack, and essentially what's reported here is items that are still ongoing and items that have been closed since the last meeting. So that's essentially what's covered in here. Happy to take any questions on any of the content in those tables.
Councillor Granger, I was looking at you, so yes, you can go first.
I just like to compliment the staff on the much better presentation, and it's good to see so many of those items now no longer on the list. So, thank you.
Yes, and I would second that comment. It makes a far easier read going through this time than previous ones. Having said that, I can see Mark Maloney's got his hand up, so if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, and again, I agree with the comments that have just been made. It's a far easier read. Kumara, and I asked you this question last time, but the same question again. In terms of the outstanding audit recommendations, has anything changed from what you conveyed last time? Do any of these keep you awake at night?
No, still comfortable with the risk levels for those outstanding items in terms of mitigating controls, either mitigating controls in place or the plans that staff have signaled to address those areas. So no risk levels on any of those items that are of concern to me at this point.
Thanks, Kumar. And the item at the top of page 41, which is around a recommendation around legislative changes regarding the full well-beings, which came from a previous report. Why can't that item be closed off now?
David, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. So the way we've approached this recommendation is in relation to the actual wording of the recommendation, which says that we recommend that the District Council ensures that all aspects of any legislative change are actioned. We've viewed this as a exercise in continuous improvement, and the controls required or the business change required is going to depend entirely on the nature of the legislation and the magnitude of change. So rather than stating that we've arrived at the end of the journey, we're taking this as an ongoing issue, and we will continue to monitor for legislation. But perhaps, Mark, I'm happy to take guidance if you have a different view on this.
Yeah, I mean, what it means effectively, I mean, I'm happy if that's the approach that management's taking, that's management's call to take. It means it will never be cleared off your outstanding audit recommendation list.
Through the chair, I'm comfortable to progress the suggestion of potentially putting that into the info pack, as it's an ongoing matter of focus. The benefit of having it in the info pack is the fact that it's still subject to scrutiny by the committee, and they can raise questions on it if they so choose. But unless there's an exception requiring that to be brought back into the agenda, it will remain in the info pack.
Mayor Webber?
Yeah, to give a bit of support, I agree. This is really a business as usual. And when we first thought of it, it was pretty significant. But now we've had several years operating in this. It's business as usual. And I think the right place to have it is business in the info pack. And then all we get is an exception report. So, you know, and this is where we rely on staff to say, are we between the tram tracks? Yes, we are, move on. If we're not, what do you require from us? So we treat it on the way to, that is most probably more appropriate. Now we've had years of managing it, and we know it's business as usual now.
Okay, thank you. So if we don't need to move that, do we? You just put it in business as usual. Okay, so if there's no more questions, looking around, can't see any. So there's a recommendation there that the Senior Assurance and Risk Specialist report be received.
What I'm going to move with the proviso that item you just talked about is taken to the info pack for future.
Yes, so that's the recommendation of the mover. So seconded Councillor Granger. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move on to 9.6 on page 45, the Health and Safety Report. So Jan is there, and I'm sure you'll take us through.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take it as the report is read. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.
I have a question, Jan. On page 46, there's following the fatal event at Te Puna Quarry Park, it says council has undertaken an independent legal and safety review to ensure that all aspects of management agreement and health and safety obligations are met. So the question has that review concluded, and what was the outcome?
So yes, it has concluded in some parts. We, in terms of the legal status, I think I updated the committee last committee. It deemed that council was the PCBU of Te Puna Quarry. So that was a finding that we weren't aware of. It's quite a unique situation in the fact that DOC are the landowners, the park are independent in terms of a voluntary group that run that committee through a management agreement with council. So so we're now working with the park to make sure that all safety obligations are met. We've since the event, we have reviewed the health and safety risk register. A new management agreement has also been developed as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sol.
Yes, I just, because of that type of agreement, how is that going to affect us with other agreements that we have with service provision? That's quite a shock. I could understand how you felt there.
That's a really good question. So we have identified a range of similar situations and have undertaken or partway through a legal review of the status of each of those agreements, the safety requirements, and obviously we have further work to do in terms of identifying some of the PCBU requirements. So a voluntary group or a society, if they employ one person, it completely changes the legal status in terms of the safety requirements and the PCBU status. So we still have a bit of work to work through with some of the voluntary groups and agreements, but we're certainly making progress in that space.
Councillor Murray-Bench. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sol, did you have a follow-up?
Can I just clarify? So the PCBU situation, you're saying, like in this particular case, came back to you because there were the employees of that organisation that was deemed that council was, but others with people, of course, become a PCBU in their own case, and it's not a council issue.
Well, we still have what we call a shared obligation, joint PCBU. So it is, yeah, I guess in terms of health and safety requirements, it is a little bit different.
Councillor Murray-Bench.
Considering the great experience that the victim had in the community was really quite out of character, that he should have been the one that had the accident, and one wonders if there was a medical, and you would never know, a medical episode that actually happened that allowed his thing to tip down the hill. But the wonderful thing about it is that those volunteers do work that sometimes is in fact quite difficult, and they don't shy off it, and they're there wet or fine doing what they want to do, and they've done a wonderful job. Peter Watson tells me he's going to be attending their monthly or bi-monthly meetings, and which will keep a closer eye on what's actually happening. But he has a great rapport with them anyway. I've been up there while he's been meeting with the local committee, and it's something that the council should be very proud of. And although we've struck this particular issue, I'm quite sure that it's not one that will happen very often at all.
Well, let's hope not. Yes. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. The summary of safety events, point 4 there. If you look at year to date, it's 219 compared to full year, or the year to date results for other years. Are you comfortable with the trend? Because, you know, if it's going up, to me, that's a good news because we're more aware of what's around us.
Yeah, very comfortable with the trend. I'd like to see it continually increasing, because the more near miss reports and the minor ones we hear of, that gives us an opportunity to fix things.
Thank you.
Member Maloney, did you have any questions on this one?
Nothing from me, Chair.
Great, thank you. Any further questions around the table? No, if not, so I'll call for a mover and seconder for that recommendation, please. Councillor Sol, Councillor Murray-Benj, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So that brings us to the end of the open section of the Audit and Risk meeting. So I'll now